This is a rolled hemmer foot, also called a narrow hemmer. It's used for making very narrow hems such as you see on linings, circle skirts and handkerchiefs. My narrow hemmer foot makes a hem that's 3 mm wide. The fabric goes in through the scroll and gets turned over twice to make the hem, which fits under this tunnel underneath. The width of the tunnel is the width that your hem will be. They can be a little tricky to get the hang of, so today I'm going to show you how to use your narrow hemmer foot in the easiest way possible, along with some bonus uses that I've found. The first thing to do a neat hem with a narrow hemmer is to make sure your edges are nice and clean. So I'm going to trim all of these to be a perfect square. There we are, so that's a nice neat square ready to have the corners seen to. We're going to do mitered corners because they're the least bulky. We're going to turn in each corner and stitch it down so that when it goes through the hemmer foot it will meet up to be something like that, but obviously a lot neater. Now the sides of the corner that we're going to turn in have to be a particular measurement. My hemmer foot is for a 3 mm hem, and the sides of the triangle have to be 5 times that, which makes a 15 mm side. I haven't used a larger hemmer foot for this, so I don't know if it's a bit different, but for a 3 mm hem you need 15 mm on each side of the triangle. Get my card. We're going to make a pressing template. 15 mm down that side and 15 mm down that side. So I'm going to cut this bit off. Don't need that anymore. I'm going to go to the iron, put this at every corner and press it in. That'll make it a lot easier to stitch down, where we're going to stitch a little bit from the edge and then cut off the excess. I shall see you back at the sewing machine in a minute. Now that I've got the corners prepared, I'm going to switch to my narrow hemmer foot. One of the most helpful things when you're making rolled hem corners is a bit of tissue paper or tearaway stabilizer. First thing to do is at one of the corners, turn the hem in as it will be when it's sewn. So mine is 3 mm twice. And give it a pin. Now, place it on the tissue paper and put that under the foot with the inside of the hem aligned roughly with the tunnel under the foot. You can start sewing on the tissue paper and work towards the fabric. When your needle's in the hem, remove the pin, slightly lift the presser foot and wrap your fabric around it. That's usually the trickiest bit. Now, your left hand is going to keep the fabric flat with your forefinger in the curl to keep it a nice shape and to control how much fabric goes into the foot. Your right hand is basically there just to help. It'll keep the fabric wrapped softly around your thumb, and then you just sew. When you get near the end, give the curl a little tug just to make sure it's nice and round, and sew to the end. I don't find it helps to backstitch with a rolled hem of foot, it just doesn't seem to work very well. So that's the beginning of our hem. Now do the same thing on the next corner. Turn it in twice your hem width, and you will find, if you've got the corners right, that you get a nice neat mitre. Now give that a pin, and then proceed as before. If you have a knee lift, that helps a bit, because then you can use both hands to wrap the fabric around the foot. Now you can use an arrow hemmer one-handed, as they did when they had hand crank sewing machines. You use the 3 fingers on your left hand to keep the fabric flat. Use your thumb to wrap the fabric around your index finger and sew. Then you can control how much goes into the foot by rolling it around your finger more or less. If you need to, raise the presser foot slightly so that the fabric can go into the curl instead of getting all bunched up. When you get to the end of anything, pinch your threads so that they don't pull and distort the fabric. Now, if I tear away the tissue paper, you can see I've got a beautiful little hem. Let's suppose you're starting to hem a skirt lining, and it being completely continuous and having no corners means you have to start in the middle. You still do your double fold hem to begin with. Just put it under the foot in place, take some stitches, put your needle down, lift the presser foot and wrap the fabric round. There we are. And start hemming. When you get to the end, obviously you can't keep going because you've got the original stitching to meet up with. So you go as far as you can, then with your needle down, lift the presser foot and unwind it, unwind the fabric, tuck the hem under, and then continue stitching and overlap the original stitching. You only need to overlap it for about 1 inch, and then you don't need to backstitch. And then, once it's pressed, you'll have a nice, neat hem all the way along. See, that's where the joining is. Now, when you're hemming a skirt lining, you are going to get to bits where you've got the seams, and they're too bulky to go through the foot. So what we'll do is hem it in the normal way. Until we're about 1.5 inches or 3 centimeters from the seam. Then we'll just snip off the tiny little triangle at the end to get rid of some of the bulk and make it a bit easier. With your fingernails, press it down into a double hem. Raise your presser foot and uncoil it, which can be a tricky thing to do. There we are. Make sure that the raw edge is tucked under all the way to the needle. There we are. If it's looking too fat, pull the fabric with your fingernail, and that will roll it tighter. Whenever you stop, have your needle down. Roll the next bit of the hem by hand as well. Make sure you press that as flat as you can. And when you're past the bulk, wrap the fabric back around your presser foot scroll, and when you're sewing you want to pull it away from the foot, because otherwise that will happen. You also need to lift the presser foot sometimes because the bulk gets caught at the back. So take it very slowly and go as neatly as you can. Presser foot and needle up. There we are. That's about as neat as it's going to get in this fabric, which is particularly troublesome. It's quite good. And there's no other way really of getting it through, unless you've got some very obedient fabric. When you're going to use a narrow hem foot on a curved edge or a bias one, the most important thing to do is to stay stitch first. So you want to stay stitch fairly close to the edge, 1/8 of an inch or so. Pull the threads as you get going so that they don't get eaten by the machine and chew the fabric up. Stop with your needle down as you go, and you want to slightly push the fabric under and perhaps increase the thread tension because you want the fabric to ease in a bit. Or if it doesn't ease in, you at least don't want it to stretch. Now switch to your hem foot. Take your top thread under and readjust your stitch settings to normal. So start as before by rolling your hem under twice. And pin to some tissue paper. I can find my pin. There's one. There we are. Needle down, pin out, wrap the fabric round. If you have a knee lift, this is a great help because it means that you can lift the presser foot just slightly to go around the curves. See how nice and neat it is? Now, this edge is longer than the one it's going onto. So you have to rotate it with your left hand slightly. Not too much because otherwise you'll get jagged stitches. It's really important to go slowly when you're narrow hemming a curve. try and keep everything even. But you can see how the easing stops this edge from stretching out when you're trying to get it onto the smaller one. And there we have a beautiful, even, narrow hem. I just need to press it to flatten it out and relax the fibres back. There we are. Nice and even and flat. Something I've discovered you can do with a narrow hammer foot is make a mock French seam. You need your seam allowances to be offset by 1/8 of an inch, and you put them into the hammer. Actually, to make that a bit easier, we'll snip off a little triangle in the corner, and then that will make it easier for it to get into the foot. Needle down, adjust. So then you just essentially hem the seam. Keeping the offset the same as you go along. And then you have a nice, even, enclosed, strong seam. It's really narrow. It'd be good, I wouldn't use it on a curve, but you can use it on blouse seams or potentially even shirt sleeves. That will be an interesting thing to try with a wider hemmer foot. But I'm really pleased with it. Look how neat it is. One nice effect you can get with a hemmer foot is a roll and shelled hem. You can even put a cord in it, and then you can gather the cord up if you want to, and that will give a nice strong gather on the edge. It's good for dance wear and just pretty things generally. So I'm going to show you how to do that. As usual, you want to fold the beginning of the hem twice your hem width and put it under the foot. Hold the threads and stop with your needle down. You want to switch to an overcasting stitch, which looks like a blind hem stitch but backwards. Wind your fabric round the scroll of the foot. So with the stitch at its standard setting, it makes a very dainty edge. If you want to make something a little bit bigger, just make the stitch longer. Move it up to 2 millimeters. There we are. It's a bit more pronounced. Now, if you want to put a decorative cord in it, needle up. You have to wrap the cord inside the scroll with the hem. Try not to get too much fabric inside the scroll, because then it loses its scallop. There we are. So you can, with sheer fabric, you can see the cord inside. You don't have to use a zigzag stitch for this, or an overcasting stitch. I'm going to switch back to a straight stitch and try it that way. There we are. It'd be really nice for Christmas decorations or dancewear, I think. And if I take it out and snip my stitches but not the cord, then I can use it to gather up. I suspect you could use shearing elastic instead of cord and then have a stretchy edge. I think this looks nicer if you use the scalloped edge. It looks a bit more controlled than if you've used a straight stitch for the gathering. Another thing you can do with this foot is to start anywhere and use it as a cording foot, a couching foot even. You can use a straight stitch, move the needle over a smidge, yeah, that gets it in. So it's almost invisibly attached, but it is firmly attached. You could use a zigzag stitch. Alright, let's see if that works. Yep, there we are. So that would be very helpful if you were making, say, a tutu, and you had to gather up a lot of fabric and didn't want your threads to snap. There we are. I hope that helped you a lot. If you have any questions or anything, just leave them in the comments below, and remember to like and subscribe.